Hello, my name is David Breeden, and I am the Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society in downtown Minneapolis. And my guest today on Free Thinking Forum is Bruce Nelson. He just recently retired after 37 years with the State Energy Office, most recently located in the Minnesota Department of Commerce as the Division of Energy Resources. Welcome, Bruce.
Yeah, well, thank you.
We want to learn some things about energy today.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's start at the beginning. How did you ever get involved in it?
Well, golly, having graduated from the university in '71 as an engineering graduate, believe it or not, engineers had a pretty hard time finding a job back then. So I worked as a contract engineer for a little bit. But fortunately, I was working for NSP at the time, now Xcel Energy, in the research department, and just was involved in a few buildings projects. At that time, there were certainly building codes, but not energy codes. And they were starting to think about maybe doing things a little bit different in buildings, but not too much progress had been made. So then in '76, an opportunity came up to work for the State Energy Office. I was doing some research in connection with my job at NSP at the time, and it just was quite an opportunity to get involved and really make a difference on the state level. So had a number of opportunities came up. The Minnesota Energy Code was brand new at that time, and an opportunity to contribute to that, as well as a lot of questions were coming up about buildings. So, for example, the U.S. Department of Energy was founded right about the same time that I started there in the fall of '76 at the Energy Office. And there was a lot of grants that were available to homeowners, particularly said, hey, we got to save energy in homes. So the Department of Energy paid for some projects around the country where they added a whole lot of attic insulation, because everybody knew that you needed to add attic insulation in order to save energy in buildings. And of course they added ventilation because there wasn't ventilation in these buildings, and that was going to save all the energy. And a couple of years went by and they said, you know, it would be interesting to find out how much energy we're saving. That would be really good to report to Congress and stuff. So they did a study, and they found that compared to the control group, the homes that had been insulated and ventilated were using substantially more energy than the homes that had not been insulated.
Oops.
And so there was a lot of questions about why this was, and it turns out that it was part of building physics that we were able to discover later in some research that I was participating in, that that the insulation level in the attics does not hold in energy as much as you'd think. It's air leaks through the from the ceiling into the attic. That's a huge contingent of a huge part of the energy use in houses. And in fact, then we went on to learn a lot more about that. So it really it was a good opportunity to change that opportunity. But sort of a long story, I feel pretty lucky to be involved in some of the early work of that, and the research that uncovered those facts about how energy was saved in buildings.
Yeah. Well, you started then in the mid to late '70s, and there's really a vast difference, isn't there, in architecture previous to the '70s?
Well, yes, more attention started to be paid to energy, of course. It was fairly inexpensive, fairly plentiful, and at the same time, we didn't really know how to save energy in buildings. We sometimes had the wrong impression, as the story I just told. So we kept learning a little bit more about it. We knew that maybe more insulation would help in houses when the first energy code was in effect in 1976, January 1st. the state legislature give them, and the governor's office give them a lot of credit to moving forward. Minnesota's always been ahead on its energy standards in its buildings. And so that was put into place, and we kept looking and evaluating how these homes were doing in some projects with the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. We did some additional work, challenging the designers, challenging the architects and the builders, engineers who put together buildings, both commercial and residential, as to, how can we possibly do this more efficiently? And people, just as things happen, people think about an idea, and so you put that into place and you test out a few houses, and we came to realize that, well, maybe, putting the house under a bunch of dirt, maybe that wasn't the most cost-effective way to achieve energy conservation. Now, of course, we have green roofs, which are very effective and very good, but before then it was a lot more exaggerated in terms of the underground houses. Realized that maybe that wasn't the cost-effective thing to do. We learned a lot about passive solar, about active solar. Those fields have come a long way over the years. So, but a main thing we learned is that it was more the air leakage in buildings that made a huge difference. And in fact, there's something we call stack effect, where the house is no more than just a fat chimney. You've got a thin chimney, skinny chimney, everybody understands it. The warm air goes up the chimney. House in the wintertime is just a fat chimney. Air is pushing up against the ceiling, and if there's holes in the ceiling, it's going to go through, cause ice dams, cause energy loss, and in fact cause a cold basement. That's pretty amazing. I have a little talk that I say, well, how would you guess that a cold basement was a result of leaks in the ceiling? But it is, because as the warm moisture goes out, cold air comes in. This also has major implications in commercial buildings too, because air leaks in the top of the building, top of the envelope as we call it, are a major source of not only energy loss, but moisture going up and out the upper parts of the building. And some buildings we see energy auditors go out and diagnose. They take a look at the outside of the building, and here's some of the bricks and exterior deteriorating up towards the top. It's because moisture has gotten in, and there's been freeze thaw and has deteriorated those areas. So early in the game, we just didn't understand that at all, and we had just different thoughts about how buildings work, and so we're pretty lucky that we've really thought that out. And so now we have tools such as blower doors, which can put a pressure on a house. In fact, there are even enormous blower doors for commercial buildings that put pressure on the building, and then with an infrared camera, you go outside and you look at where the air is leaking outside the building.
I'll be darned. Well, you mentioned both the architects and the builders. When these new ideas began to hit, were they immediately open to change, or?
Well, it just as any change, it comes slowly. But I'll tell you, as people started to realize there are better ways to build buildings, especially the home builders, have to give enormous credit for them, that we really worked as a team to figure out how to do things. We working for the state office, very careful not to say, okay, here's how you're going to do it, and just that doesn't, whatever doesn't matter. Really, we learn from them and they learn from us, and research going on, we really got a better understanding of how we could cost effectively build buildings, making them not only more energy efficient, but more healthy and more comfortable, all at the same time. It was quite amazing. And so now we have, in Minnesota, we building the most energy efficient buildings in the country. They're extremely airtight. The phrase "build tight, ventilate right" came to be a builder's mantra, and the Minnesota Builders, it's just incredible how good of a job that they do.
Well, along those lines, I mean, I guess as some of the oldest continuously operating buildings in the city and the state are churches, religious institutions. A lot of times they are old and they were built for looks and not efficiency.
Yeah.
And also often congregations can't really afford to throw millions of dollars at upgrades. So how do they do?
Well, and upgrades are then especially complicated by the fact that you don't want to change the look of the building. There's such beautiful buildings. So they are certainly a challenge, and especially that, say, the lighting in a congregational building is usually not on all that many hours. It's not on 50 and 60 hours a week, as is an office building, and so it makes things a lot more difficult to be affordable. But there's some really good things and really good organizations that are working hard, and I got to give a lot of credit to the utilities in Minnesota and all around the country for having programs that offer for churches and all and all kinds of buildings, residential and commercial buildings, help with experts that come in, do an energy audit, walk through, and give recommendations, and then follow that up with rebates. One issue I wanted to talk about particularly was the organizations, just the members of the congregations organizing and working towards climate change. At the First Unitarian, we have the Climate Change Committee, and there's in the Twin Cities area, there's the Interfaith Power and Light. These organizations are very good, a lot of energy, a lot of member energy, and it was explained to me the other day when I was doing a workshop for them that their fundamental, I was doing this workshop on buildings, and yet there were other workshops going on other aspects they were doing, and they explained to me that their intent is a three level. First of all is the political effort, really writing to congressmen, about the pipeline, about the power lines, about whatever. And then the second is their personal faith in how they care for the earth. And then the third level being their building. And so my emphasis, of course, has always been on the building end, which I think is treated a little bit lightly. I'm really trying to get people to think more about the buildings end. I think a lot of congregations that are involved, if you ask them, well, what's the energy performance of your building and how many of your congregants have had energy audits in their houses, I don't, not that they haven't, certainly many have, but they don't know that information. So that taking that responsibility and getting right down to the nuts and bolts, quite literally nuts and bolts, because that's what buildings are about, benchmarking their buildings, and I just, that would be my hope, that the organizations would do more of that and pay attention to things that they can do with the building, and really do some investigation to find out. And what is the best thing we can do with our building, and energy benchmarking, which I'll talk about more. But energy benchmarking, knowing where you're at, is a really important aspect of that.
So it's a lot easier to get yourself worked up and write to your senator.
Oh gosh, it's so easy to tell other people what they should be doing, but then to look back and say, oh gosh, well, we could do that. It takes money, and it takes some changing your thought, because you may have thought that, oh my gosh, we should do this in our building, whereas there may be other priorities. It's pretty interesting how things go.
Well, I know that First Unitarian Society won the Battle of the Buildings.
Oh gosh, yeah, we did. We have a little sign display we got here in when was that? Year 2000, I don't see that. Yeah, 2011. 2011 here. We won first prize among the congregational buildings in the U.S. EPA Energy Star Battle of the Buildings campaign. And the Battle of the Buildings goes on. There is a congregational category, and we did very well in that. Now, in order to participate, and in fact, in order to really take advantage of the tools and resources available from the Energy Star, everybody's heard about Energy Star appliances and windows and what have you. But a very important thing is their building benchmarking. And in fact, they have a category of buildings now, which is congregational buildings. So the churches and mosques they have some similarities that they can compare to other standard buildings. And the benchmarking tool, all you have to do is set up your account, enter your data, and then it will tell you how you rank on 0 to 100 scale. Okay. Now, when we first got started at First Unitarian in the mid 2000s, with our Energy Star score, I had been keeping track of our energy use for a long time, entered into the Energy Star database. We were at about 28, 30. Now that means that we were at 28 to 30% on a 0 to 100 scale of the best building in the U.S., best congregational building being 100, the worst being 0. So we were quite a ways down. And over a matter of a couple of years, we were able to get ourselves up to a level of more than 60. So we were pretty proud of that.
And you didn't spend millions and millions?
No, was not spending millions and millions. A lot of it was building operation, things that you just wouldn't recognize, or things that over the years had gotten changed and modified, and so re-enabling those and doing some investment, a very cost-effective investment in some control systems for our steam boiler, as well as for our auditorium ventilation and heating has really made an enormous difference. So we are continuing to work on that. As you know, we're talking about some changes to lighting, putting in some LED lighting, and as well as, however, one of the first steps of that is going to be a monitoring, keeping track of how much energy we're using. So we're going to be installing some power demand monitoring, because demand, the kilowatt demand that we put on our building, it really peaks on a Sunday morning, and we're trying to figure out how we might avoid that peak by putting off some of the electric load until later. And so we're really working on that aspect of it.
Interesting. Well, I mean, what excites you most about, I mean, I know you've been looking down the road for some years, and so what's coming down the pike right now?
Oh man, I'll tell you, the big talk these days is NZEB, Net Zero Energy Buildings. And there's a lot of conferences and talk about that, and for the different building types. New Buildings Institute is one of the organizations that is really working in that regard. Department of Energy has a number of programs, but for both commercial and residential, now they're not talking about zero energy, they're talking about net zero energy. So the first step in terms of a net zero building is to get a very well-performing energy performing building. Typical buildings might be 100,000, and the units are BTUs per square foot per year. You know, it's like per square foot, because the bigger the building, obviously, the more energy you'll use. But if you can get that 100,000 typical number down to 20,000 BTUs per square foot per year, now you're in the neighborhood of being able to install solar cost effectively, so that during the day you can be generating excess energy, more than you're using, and feeding that back into the utility system. And then at night, of course, you're going to be needing to pull some energy out of the utility system. In the net, if you can hit zero, that's fantastic. In fact, there are buildings in the country that are actually zero energy buildings. They're actually putting more energy into the system than they're taking out during the day.
Wow.
So that's something to strive for. But net zero energy is a really exciting possibility and something that gives us a goal to shoot for.
Okay. Fascinating. Okay. Well, all right. So let's take someone who has a commercial building.
Yeah.
And what do I do first? I say,
Well,
I want to save
where
some money.
Where do you go? Okay, how do you save money? The first thing you do is you take a step that won't save you any energy directly. You gather your energy data together and you benchmark it. And or you hire somebody that can gather your energy together and benchmark it. You know where you are. Because if you have a very poorly operating building, one that wastes a lot of energy, it's obvious you save a little bit of energy. You can do that maybe pretty cost effectively. It would be a really easy thing to do. If you have an extremely efficient building, you may not necessarily even know you have an extremely efficient building because you just, your fuel bills are low, but they're kind of hard to compare.
Right.
For that building, it's going to be harder for you to get a cost-effective energy conservation. So, if you can compare yourself as to what the standard building should be taking, with our score of 28 to 30, we knew that we had a lot to go, and so we did move in that direction very rapidly. To energy benchmark your building is really number one for commercial buildings. And then in Minneapolis, Chicago, a few places have recently mandated that their larger commercial buildings not only benchmark, but also share that energy benchmark information with their citizens. And so that's something that you'll see more of. I think it would be great if commercial buildings would be benchmarking on their own. And someday I'm sure it'll happen that they'll say, hey, look at our property. This is a great property to have a lease in because our energy consumption is really low. You're a responsible citizen and your costs are lower. So there's more and more of that happening. There's the Energy Star benchmarking tool, which is an excellent tool, www.energystar.gov. And then look for the benchmarking, and then many of the different kinds of buildings, office buildings, congregation buildings, as I said, nursing care buildings, hospitals, that sort of thing. There are tools that are specialized to benchmark those kinds of buildings. So that would be the first step. And then secondly, or at the same time, talk to your energy utilities. Talk to your electric and gas suppliers, and they're very anxious. The electric and gas companies in Minnesota and all across the countries have come to realize, and they're all just very supportive of conservation because they realize that it just is so much less investment to help people reduce their energy use than it is to build the transmission, generation, distribution system and put that all in place. They would much rather have buildings running very efficiently. It's much better for the economy. So it would be contacting your utility rep. Usually commercial buildings have utility reps, and they would be able to help you out very much. We took advantage of some of the utility rebates for the work we did at First Unitarian.
Oh, okay. Well, what about me as a homeowner?
Well, you as a homeowner, you can also benchmark. If you want to do that, there's a tool on the EnergyStar.gov website to do that. But probably even the first step would be to simply contact your utility to have an energy audit done. Now, there's a couple of different levels of utility of energy audits that can be done. There's a lower level, that's the walkthrough. It's very good. You'll find out some good information. There's the premium audit, which is still it's about $100, I think it is. And that involves this blower door and infrared that I had mentioned earlier. And they'll examine the building. You can really identify exactly what to do with the building for the most benefit.
Okay.
So there are resources around. There are good things that you can do, and we're pretty lucky that they're available here in Minnesota.
Well, I mean, along those lines, I know also there are some financial resources available to homeowners.
Yes, yep, and commercial buildings, really excellent for commercial building, for new commercial buildings, the Energy Design Assistance Program that many utilities in the state offer, and to come up with really pioneering designs, do the expected energy performance of the building, and certainly for existing buildings, there's rebates for lots of equipment and changes to your building that would be cost effective. And the important thing is that they're cost effective for the whole society. You know, they're obviously cost effective for the building owner because he's getting he or she is getting a break on the piece of equipment that they're going to put in and save them energy. But at the same time, the utility is now avoiding putting in the distribution and transmission as well as the generation and or gas pipelines. And so it is beneficial for the whole society, and that's a very important thing. For homeowners, of course, the utility rebates, and they're getting much better at those and in terms of making sure that people who get a rebate on the refrigerator don't take the old refrigerator and just move it out to the garage. It needs to be, you know, there needs to be a trade for the old piece of equipment. But those standards that Department of Energy has been working on for a long time have really been incredibly valuable in terms of the economic benefit to the country.
Interesting. And well, what about low-income folk?
Well, you know, in Minnesota and certainly other states have community action programs that administer a weatherization program that really help out. Many homes are weatherized, especially was helped over the past few years with the stimulus money that was passed Congress, and not only helped out those businesses, but also made homes much more energy efficient. So, there is low-income fuel assistance, of course, but also weatherization dollars available, and the utilities are very happy to help out with that. Financial resources for commercial building, you know, you have the energy savings, and these days with relatively inexpensive gas, but you hear it's going up, so it is cost effective for them in many cases to pay for that. Usually there's a utility rebate, but there are some other programs. There's the Guaranteed Energy Savings Program that the State Department of Commerce runs that is available and will help out public buildings, I should say. The Guaranteed Energy Savings is for public buildings and helps them make sure that they're getting a good performing contract for the Guaranteed Energy Savings Program. Public buildings always have a hard time, you know, budgeting for, you know, how are we going to pay for this?
Right.
And so that's a good it's a good thing. There's also for residences or people who have delivered fuels, propane, oil, which are certainly a small but yet significant segment of Minnesota's population. Minnesota Building Performance Association, mbpa.us, has a number of contractors around the state that do an excellent job of doing energy audits for buildings. Also, there's another website, Desire, DSIREUSA.org. That's the database of state incentives for renewable and efficiency. That's a very good place to check.
Wow. Well, I've learned a lot, and I've taken some notes, and able to find some resources. Thank you so much for being here today and imparting your wisdom from 37 years of public service in the energy sector and saving energy. Thank you so much, Bruce Nelson. And I am David Breeden, Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society.